The honourable member for Durham.
Madam Speaker, Scott Bryson wanted to stop the $700 million Davie shipbuilding contract. Scott Bryson, Judy Foote, and the MP for Beausejour were lobbied by corporate friends to kill the deal. The only reason they didn't was the fact that their actions at Cabinet leaked out. Admiral Mark Norman was not the source of the Cabinet leak, but his was the only name put forward to blame. Why?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, we have full confidence in our government institutions, and they all function very well in this case. The RCMP investigated, Madam Speaker, and laid charges. The investigation, the decision to lay charges, and the prosecution was handled by the Prosecution Service of Canada, Madam Speaker, as was the decision to stay charges. All of those decisions were made independently of the Department of Justice, of my office, and of the Government of Canada, Madam Speaker. Our institutions are functioning well, and the rule of law is alive and well in Canada.
The honourable member for Durham.
Madam Speaker, we're confident the Director of Public Prosecutions did their job and made the right call to admit there was no case against Mark Norman, but Mark Norman's name was first given to the RCMP by the Prime Minister. Mark Norman was not at the Cabinet meeting. Mark Norman was not the source of the Cabinet leak. In fact, he was just one of 73 names of people that knew about Scott Bryson's attempt to kill the Davie deal. Why did the Prime Minister single out Admiral Mark Norman to blame for the leak from his Cabinet meeting?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Madam Speaker, as the honourable member well knows, investigations are the realm of the RCMP in Canada, and they did that. Madam Speaker, as the honourable member well knows, the decision to lay charges, to evaluate that evidence and lay charges, rests with the Public Prosecution Service of Canada, and that was done here, as was the decision to stay charges, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Durham.
The Prime Minister gave Mark Norman's name to the RCMP. The Prime Minister's office resisted giving documents to Mark Norman's lawyers. The Prime Minister team counseled witnesses. The Prime Minister's lawyers asked the prosecutors if they could engineer issues at trial. The Prime Minister's office even used code words to avoid revealing Mark Norman's name in documents. Direction, deception, and delay. That's the Prime Minister's record of political interference in the Admiral Norman affair. When will he apologize to Mark Norman?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Veterans Affairs. Madam Speaker, there have been accusations against Vice-Admiral Norman, and they were stayed. The PPSC also said these decisions were taken independently. There was no influence exerted from the outside on the PPSC, and this includes political influence in the decision to stay the proceedings. Any contrary assertion is absurd. The honourable member for Bellechasse. Madam Speaker, it's simple. When the Liberals came to power, they did everything they could to prevent Davie Shipyard from getting the Asterix contract, which was essential for the Canadian Navy. What did they do? The Prime Minister launched an investigation to look into it. When will the Prime Minister apologize and promote the Vice-Admiral, not demote him? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker, there was no other factor taken in coming to this decision. There was no contact or influence from outside the PPSC, and this includes political influence. This decision was taken this week. Charges against the Vice-Admiral were stayed, and each decision was taken independently. The honourable member for Bellechasse. Madam Speaker, this is ridiculous. There are all kinds of skeletons in the Liberal closet. Even the clerk of the Privy Council. They should tell the truth. Because here's a man who stood up for the Canadian Navy, stood up for jobs in Quebec, stood up for Davie Shipyard. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, no factor was taken into account. The Deputy Minister looked at the policy concerning this affair. We agree with that advice.
Member for Churchill, Kiwatanuk, Aski.
Mr. Speaker, let's look at Liberal government rhetoric versus Liberal government action on climate change. They said they'd put a price on carbon, but it won't apply to 80% of major emissions. They said they were going to force corporate Canada to take the climate crisis seriously, but here's $12 million for fridges, Loblaws. They said they would help phase out oil and gas, but today we hear that they're paying $54 billion in new subsidies for the billionaire fossil fuel industry. So instead of hooking up their billionaire pals, when will this government take climate change seriously and bring in a Green New Deal?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm always happy to talk about our climate change plan. Yes, it includes a price on pollution. Polluters need to pay, but we're giving them money back. That means that a family of four in Ontario will get $307. We're phasing out coal. We're making historic investment in renewables, but we're also ensuring a just transition for workers, because we need to make sure that workers and communities can thrive as we move to a cleaner future. We're focused on making historic investments in public transportation, something that the NDP wouldn't have done because they plan to balance the budget and not make those historic investments. We're also making historic investments in clean solutions and energy efficiency. We have a climate plan.
Honourable Member for Churchill, Kiwatanuk, Aski.
Madam Speaker, people living on Hollow Water First Nation and in Seymourville are worried about a proposed frack sand mine in their territories. They're very concerned that this project could expose them to dangerous levels of carcinogens. It is clear that the provincial government is pushing for the project to go forward without good faith and honest discussion. And the environmental assessment has been bungled, leaving residents worried about their health and the land. People on the ground are calling on the federal government to step in. So will the government step up to protect people and the land?
Bravo.
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Madam Speaker, we believe in the importance of proper environmental assessments. That's why we are rebuilding trust in environmental assessments through Bill C-69, unfortunately opposed by the Conservative Party. That will ensure that we do environmental assessments in consultation with Indigenous peoples at the start. That means that we will be listening to the public, that we will be making decisions based on science and evidence, and we will ensure that good projects go ahead in a timely fashion.
The Honourable Member for Sherbrooke. Madam Speaker, you'll never guess what the member for Compton-Stanstead, who is Minister of Agriculture, is telling her fellow citizens. In her last householder, Madam Minister asserted that spending $4.5 billion to buy a polluting pipeline was an inevitable step towards an energy transition. Really? It's as if you were taking the chain off your bicycle to go faster. Will the minister rise in this House to explain her rationale and say why this is inevitable? $4.5 billion for a pipeline towards energy transition? Madam Speaker, we are following the advice of the Supreme Court. We have consulted with Indigenous communities. We've had roundtables on the form that consultation should take. We have spoken and consulted with many stakeholders. Every day, we're going forward in the proper way. The Honourable Member for Sherbrooke. Madam Speaker, a leader does not spend this much on an oil pipeline. The IMF says that subsidies given to the fossil fuel energies add up to $54 billion. $54 billion. And this government says it's a leader in the fight against climate change. A leader doesn't buy an old pipeline for billions of dollars. The government will the government launch a transition towards renewable energy?
Climate change.
Madame la Présidente, soyons clairs.
Madam Speaker, let's be clear. We have already eliminated 8 out of 9 subsidies to fossil fuels. We are ensuring a fair transition. We want this not only in Canada, but in the world. We're a leader worldwide in dealing with coal. We're investing historic funds in renewables, in public transit, in clean energy, and in measures that will help stop pollution and help families.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Everyone who knows Admiral Norman knows him to be a respected, dependable, and distinguished member of the Royal Canadian Navy. So why is it that the Liberals couldn't have given him the benefit of the doubt by keeping his job open for him? And why didn't they pay his legal fees until 3 days ago when they were shamed into doing it? Madam Speaker, why?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Veterans, to the Minister for Veterans Affairs.
Week's decision, the Deputy Minister has received the policy in place regarding Vice-Admiral Norman's request to have his legal fees paid for as it relates to this case. We agree with your advice, Madam Speaker. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for Bow River.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is increasingly clear that the Prime Minister's government politically interfered in Mark Norman's case, just like in SNC-Lavalin. This government withheld documents and others by blacking pages totally out. They used code names to hide their actions. They coached witnesses. Mr. Norman's lawyer was clear. The documents should have been handed over to the RCMP and to the prosecution. Why wouldn't the Liberals release the documents to Mr. Norman's defense team, or even unredacted? What is the Prime Minister trying to hide here?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Madam Speaker, I would like to remind this House that the Department of Justice cooperated with the court for the production of documents. We're talking about, Madam Speaker, over 8,000 documents from 7 different government agencies. The decision to redact, Madam Speaker, is made independently of political bodies. Madam Speaker, as counsel for Justice for Admiral Norman said, our justice system is truly unassailable. It's proven itself. Our institutions have proven themselves. And Madam Speaker, there was no interference from the government in this case.
The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Lafiole. Madam Speaker, for months the government did its utmost in order not to provide documents necessary to Mark Norman's defence, and this pleading cabinet confidence. Vice-Admiral Norman didn't even have a right to his own email. What is the government trying to hide? The Honourable Minister of Justice. Madam Speaker, as I just said in English, we're talking about 8,000 documents and 7 government organizations. We cooperated with the court. We produced the documents. It took time, but there were 8,000 documents, and the decisions to redact were not taken politically. So we did cooperate. The system worked as it should, and we are proud of our justice system. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Lafiole. Madam Speaker, the government politicized military procurement by prioritizing their partisan interests. The Astérix was a resounding success, and it was delivered on time and on budget by Davy Shipyards. It's a success that Canadians and the Vice-Admiral should be proud of. When will the Prime Minister apologize? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The accusations against Vice-Admiral Norman were stayed. Every decision was taken in a completely independent way. No outside influence was exerted. And there was no political influence in the decision to prosecute the Vice-Admiral or to stay the proceedings. Any contrary assertion is absurd.
Speaker, first the Prime Minister said Vice-Admiral Norman would be charged before the investigation was even complete. Then the Prime Minister's office did not provide the requested documents for 2 years, nearly bankrupting Mark Norman and putting his family through hell. Then, just as the Liberal MP for Orleans was going to testify against the government, suddenly the charges are dropped. Clearly, this was another attack by the Prime Minister on someone who is standing up for what is right. Will the Prime Minister apologize to Admiral Mark Norman and reinstate him Vice Chief of the Defence Staff?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development.
I'm really glad that the Conservative Party is now seized of the idea of having independent civil service provide advice to government. It's important, and I'm also glad that they're talking about people's jobs, because that's important too. We've got some other independent advice today from Stats Canada, an organization which the previous government had a lot of trouble dealing with the independence of. That's 106,000 jobs were created in the last month in this country. Let me put that into context. They might understand. In Stephen Harper's last year, they celebrated 72,000 jobs in 1 year. 106,000 jobs in 1 month. That's independent advice they should listen to and take note of.
The Honourable Member for Medicine Hat, Cardston Warner.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's evident that the jobs they're talking about had nothing to do with Vice-Admiral Norman, because they cared nothing about his job. And there appears to be overwhelming evidence that the Prime Minister and his Liberal government went to incredible lengths to try and keep truth hidden, deliberately suppressing information that would eventually exonerate Vice-Admiral Norman. This political interference is a damning indictment of this current government, and Canadians deserve answers. Will the Prime Minister apologize to Vice-Admiral Norman and reinstate him as the Vice Chief of Staff?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Madam Speaker, the premise of that question is entirely false. As the Director for Public Prosecutions has said on at least 2 occasions, Madam Speaker, as the prosecutor in question has said, there was no political interference in this case. There was no political interference in the decision to lay charges. There was no political interference in the decision to stay charges. And there was no political interference over the course of the trial. Madam Speaker, this government produced documents as it was supposed to in accordance with the court orders. We did so in good faith, Madam Speaker. There are systems of governance in Canada. Our judicial systems function well.
The Honourable Member for Saskatoon West.
Madam Speaker, this week the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance was bragging about all the support for seniors coming from this government. But here's a reality check. Seniors living on fixed income and affordable housing in Saskatchewan don't see this help. When their GIS or OAS increases, their rent goes up. And if their CPP increases with inflation, their GIS goes down. So, will this government pass my bill C-353 and end these clawbacks to ensure that when seniors on low income see their pension payments increase, so does their quality of life? Hear, hear.
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development.
I'd like to thank the member opposite for raising an important issue. Yes, we do have challenges when provincial governments claw back the benefits that we deliver to seniors, especially when it comes to circumstances involving housing. But we also understand that there is much to do for seniors. That's why our government has invested so heavily in reducing poverty, because when you reduce poverty, you don't create low-income seniors. You create seniors that have a chance to succeed. Our investments, including the GIS improvements, including CPP reform, including investments in affordable housing, are all aimed at making sure seniors get the quality of life they deserve as they move into retirement, and we will not stop working hard to make sure every senior in this country is given the services they need.
The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Madam Speaker, a Quebec City tramway would allow for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and would offer a quality service to its citizens. A recent poll showed that a majority of Quebec citizens were in favour of this. The government of Quebec is trying to find a solution to finding the $800 billion they need to fund the tramway. Madam Speaker, instead of buying an old pipeline, why don't they listen to the Quebec City and fund the tramway the citizens want? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance. Madam Speaker, it's a pleasure to answer. In 2018, there was money for the tramway. It's still there. Madam Speaker, this is a project that is very important for Quebec City, and if I can remind him, since 2015 in Quebec, we have a huge number of infrastructure projects. Madam Speaker, we're there, the government's there for the people of Quebec.
Madam Speaker, we told the Liberals time and time again that they were irresponsibly rushing through changes to Canada's election laws, and now major social media platforms such as Google confirm that they weren't consulted on significant changes to legislation. Although this Prime Minister claims to believe in consulting with stakeholders, clearly he only wants to hear from those who agree with the way he wants things done. Why did the Prime Minister force through changes to our electoral system instead of taking the time to get it right?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Madam Speaker, in all fairness, we will take no lessons from the other side about making changes to the electoral system. The legacy of the Unfair Elections Act has been long, and we heard about it extensively in 2015. We acted promptly to deal with it. With respect to the social media platforms and the position they're taking today, we find that disappointing. We know these social media platforms have the resources and the ability to take action, and to take action now. We know that Bill C-76 was given first reading well over a year ago, and its long endurance within this Parliament is largely due to the blockage of that legislation by the Conservative Party at Proc.
Shame. The honourable member for Perth Wellington.
Madam Speaker, in the government's efforts to rush their flawed elections bill through the House, they failed to consult with those to whom the law would apply. Yesterday at committee, Google and YouTube confirmed that they cannot implement the changes in time for the election. They were not consulted on the changes, and the changes themselves were unclear. Madam Speaker, how can Canadians have any faith in these Liberals when even Google says that their changes are unclear? What are these Liberals trying to do?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Madam Speaker, we reject categorically the premise of that entire question. Bill C-76 was first of all fundamental to ensuring the stability of the democracy in this country in response to the Unfair Elections Act. Secondly, when you talk about elections and electoral fairness, you need to talk about online platforms, including social media companies. Third, in terms of notice to those companies, they have had adequate notice and ample notice. Fourth, the resources of those companies are larger than most nations on this planet, for goodness sakes. To purport that they haven't had the ability to address these issues is absolutely and categorically false.
The honourable member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Madam Speaker, this year Canada commemorates 74 years of victory in Europe, a day to remember our defeat of the Nazi Empire. This is a day to honour those who gave their lives, and yet after carelessness on the minister's part, Canadians were shocked to see German soldiers on ads to celebrate our Canadian warriors. How many levels of vetting did these ads go through, and how could the minister and his office allow these careless and offensive ads to go forward?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Minister of Veterans Affairs and National Defence.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This was a completely unacceptable mistake, and the video was removed immediately. I can assure you I and the people involved are very concerned, and we are taking steps to make sure this does not happen again. But, Mr. Speaker, what we want to do and make sure is that it does not detract from the message. The message is 74 years ago this week, our soldiers liberated Europe. That is the important message, and we will make sure that this type of thing with this ad never happens again. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Madam Speaker, Wednesday was the 74th anniversary of Victory in Europe Day. This is a day where we mark the sacrifice of Allied nations made to win the Second World War, especially the tens of thousands of Canadians who gave their lives. The Liberals mark VE Day by thanking Nazis for their sacrifice, complete with an online video featuring German troops and a voiceover by the Veterans Minister. Our veterans, their families, and Canadians deserve better. Saying it won't happen again is one thing. Will the minister stand and apologize to veterans?
The Honourable Minister of Veterans Affairs and National Defence.
Of course, Mr. Speaker, I would do anything I could for our veterans, including apologize for the likes of this to happen. This is totally very unacceptable. And as I said, we will make sure that this will not happen again. And I've instructed my Deputy Minister to find out just what took place, what was missed. But it's, as I indicated previously, it's very important that we do not take the true meaning of what happened 74 years ago this week, what our troops did to provide life and for the European people. To liberate Europe is so important. That is what the message is all about. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Windsor West.
Windsor.
Kamse.
This week, I asked the government if they'll adopt a national auto strategy before more people lose their livelihoods. And this issue hits close to home in Windsor, Tecumseh. First, it was Chrysler. Now it's the Ford Essex engine plant that are eliminating shifts. This government scrambles to react, but there needs to be a master plan. The NDP and experts have been calling for a national auto strategy for years, and the government has a plan waiting on the shelf. So, will the Liberals stop ignoring Windsor and southwestern Ontario, for that matter, and commit to a national auto strategy?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development. Thank you. Madam Speaker, we have a plan, and the plan is working well. The auto sector remains solid and well-placed to build cars of today and the future. In total, some $6 billion have been invested in the auto sector, creating and securing scores of jobs since we took power. Since 2015, over 11,000 new jobs were created. Investments include $110 million at Toyota Cambridge, $89 million in Guelph, $41.8 for facilities at Honda, and the list goes on. Our government is firmly committed to the auto industry.
The honourable member for Windsor West.
Their strategy is working so well that they actually had their incentive program that excluded the only Canadian-built electric vehicle in Canada, and we had to force them to reverse that, Madam Speaker. And the $6 billion that they talk about invested over their tenure, Madam Speaker, let's take a look at Detroit. One city alone, Madam Speaker. General Motors is investing in Detroit $8 billion, Ford $1.5 billion, Fiat Chrysler $4.5 billion. The age of innovation in auto is here. This government is nowhere in the game. Why was the Prime Minister such a defeatist when it comes to manufacturing? And why is he bringing his vision to fruition? We need a national auto strategy now.
The honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation, Sciences and Social Development and Economic Development.
I'd like to thank my honourable colleague. He will realize that we have put in place a number of strategies for the auto workers. It works. We've got $6 billion invested since 2015 in the auto sector, in our workers and Canadian workers in this sector. It's a plan that is working. These investments include $110 million in Toyota Cambridge. That's important. $49 in Guelph, which have created some 1,500 jobs. $49.8 million in facilities for Honda. And I reiterate, the list goes on. Our government is committed.
Honourable member for Nepean.
Madam Speaker, the jobs report released today shows biggest one-month gain since 1976.
Wow.
Canadians created over 106,000 mostly full-time jobs. Wage growth has also gone up. More businesses are investing, more employers are hiring, and more Canadians have good-paying jobs. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Employment tell what are we doing to continue this success?
Very good. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Order. When I recognize you, then you can speak. Otherwise, I would ask members to either listen or wait their turn. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Employment, Insurance.
That's great advice, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to thank my colleague from Ottawa, Nepean, for asking that question, because we know that question would never come from the Conservatives. They are embarrassed to see the success of this government almost twice as many jobs created by this government than the Harper Conservatives. Madam Speaker, 1 million jobs since coming to power, 106,000 last month alone. We said we were going to invest in innovation, invest in people, invest in job creation. We promised that. We delivered it as advertised.
Once again, that when somebody has the floor, we need to listen, even though if we don't like the answer. The honourable member for Calgary Signal Hill.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. These Liberals love to throw numbers around, so why don't I help them out a bit? You know, we've heard time and again, 347 days. Well, let me ask this government right now, Madam Speaker, 347 days since that government spent $4.5 billion taxpayers' dollars on a pipeline. At the time, the finance minister said construction of the new pipeline would start immediately. 347 days later, we have not had one shovel of dirt turned. I'd like to ask the finance minister, when is construction of this pipeline going to start?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Natural Resources.
The Conservative Party on how to move forward in the right way. We follow the course direction. We know meaningful dialogue with Indigenous peoples is a fundamental obligation on our part, not a suggestion. We believe in protecting our environment at the same time. We are moving forward in the right way. We are following the court's path forward. We will take no advice. Canadians expect us to get it right, and that is what we are focused on.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes Brock.
Madam Speaker, it's been years since the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion was approved, yet this government continues to delay. While billions of dollars investment flees the country, Canadians are choosing provincial governments that represent economic prosperity and responsible resource development over Liberal rhetoric. When will the Prime Minister finally get shovels in the ground and get the TMX built?
The Honourable Prime Minister Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources.
The member very well knows we have approved Line 3 pipeline. We actually also support Keystone XL. And on TMX, we are moving forward in the right way. They don't want to listen to the courts. They don't want to have meaningful dialogue with Indigenous people. In order to move this right, we need to do all the hard work, and that's what we're doing. We have 8 teams on the ground right now. We are doing our phase 3 consultation. We are basically looking forward to June 18th to make a final decision on how to move forward in the right way. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
The honourable member for Foothills.
When asked about his plan for Trans Mountain, the Prime Minister said, "We will get this pipeline built." Well, that was a year ago. The PBO reported any construction delays cost taxpayers $700 million a year. And if the pipeline is not completed by 2023, it is no longer economically viable. Any delays past June cost taxpayers even more and put the entire project at risk. Will the Prime Minister be honest with Canadians? When will the Trans Mountain expansion be built?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources.
Speaker, after 10 years of inaction under Stephen Harper, 99% of our oil exports were still being sent to the United States. The Conservatives had 10 years to expand the global markets, and they failed. Conservatives continue to put politics over the process. We remain committed to the right process. That is what we're focused on. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
The honourable member for Lakeland.
4 pipelines were approved and constructed under Conservatives, and not a single inch of new pipeline is in service under these Liberals. But more than 12,000 Canadians signed Angela Cook's petition this week, calling on the Liberals to approve the Trans Mountain expansion on June 18th. The independent science-based expert regulator said it should be built twice. At least 43 Indigenous communities and the majority of Canadians want construction to start. It's been over 11 months since Liberals spent $4.5 billion tax dollars and said the expansion would be built immediately. Will it be approved for this year's summer construction season?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources.
Madam Speaker, as I said, We are focused on getting this process in the right way, ignoring certainly any of the advice from the Conservatives, because we know they failed for 10 years to get any new pipelines built in new markets. Canadians need to be reassured that this process is being followed in the right way. We have teams on the ground that are doing meaningful consultation. We have basically ensured that on the environmental side, we have conditions and recommendations that we are following. That is what the Canadians have to have confidence in. That is what we're focused on.
The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Thank you, Madam Speaker. In all regions like Berthier-Masquinongé, access to high-speed internet has become absolutely necessary for families, SMEs, and farming businesses. Despite that, people are deprived of a reliable high-speed internet connection, and this is completely unacceptable in 2019. These are pressing needs, but the Liberals have no plan to bridge the digital divide. An NDP government will do its utmost to resolve these problems for people in the regions. My question is simple. When will we see a strategy to connect Quebecers and Canadians? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Rural Economic Development.
Important for the prosperity of our country. We are focusing on making sure that we connect all our Canadians. We have approved 180 projects and 900 communities, and plus 190 Indigenous communities. By 2021, our investments will connect 90% of Canadian households with high-speed internet. Budget 2019 will even go further with $1.7 billion investment to connect 95% of Canadians by 2026. Where you live in Canada shouldn't limit the ability to participate in the digital economy. Our government is taking real action. We have a plan, and we're going to make it happen.
The Honourable Member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie. Madam Speaker, in Saudi Arabia, 9 women are in prison simply for having peacefully defended their rights. They were subjected to sexual abuse and torture. Those who committed these acts must be sanctioned.
Alors, will the government issue individual sanctions against those who are responsible for the torture of Loujain Alakloul and the other women detainees? Or will it continue to do business as usual with Saudi Arabia, putting profits ahead of human rights?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We are very concerned by the detention of women rights activists in Saudi Arabia, including Loujain Al-Hathoul. Canada remains committed to advocating for detained activists in their struggle for gender equality and human rights. We have raised this situation with Saudi officials and will continue to do so alongside our international partners. Canada will never hesitate to defend human rights. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Wellington Halton Hills.
Madam Speaker, concerns are being raised about proposed changes to Hong Kong's extradition law. These changes would allow the extradition of anyone in Hong Kong, including 300,000 Canadians living there, to mainland China. We have an extradition treaty with Hong Kong, and in mainland China, 2 Canadians are in jail, another 2 are in death row. Democracies around the world are under threat. It's even more important at this time that Canada stand for democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. Will a minister in this government make a clear, unambiguous statement about these proposed changes to Hong Kong's extradition law?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Madam Speaker, we've raised serious questions with the Government of Hong Kong regarding the proposed amendments to their extradition laws. Ensuring the safety and security of Canadians at home and abroad is a top priority for the Prime Minister, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and for our entire government, and I'm certain for the members opposite. We will continue to closely monitor any developments surrounding possible changes to Hong Kong's extradition laws.
The Honourable Member for Montmagny, Lille, Kamouraska, Rivière-Toulouse. Madam Speaker, under the negotiations with the United States, the trade negotiations, the Liberal government was taken to the cleaners. A third of Canadian exporters are already being affected by U.S. tariffs on steel. Garon, a large and excellent company in my riding, is being hit twice since May 1st by 25% Canadian tariffs on their raw material, threatening, therefore, their competitiveness and jobs. Instead of a new tax, why doesn't the Prime Minister take action to settle the dispute and get these tariffs dropped on both sides of the border, Madam Speaker?
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Madam Speaker, in response to these illegal U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum, we undertook Canada's strongest trade action since World War II by imposing $16.6 billion in countermeasures on U.S. exports to Canada. And we are constantly examining our tariff list to ensure it has the greatest impact possible. We are also providing $2 billion in support for Canadian manufacturers. This week, the minister spoke to Secretary Mike Pompeo about the importance of removing the unjustified and illegal U.S. tariffs, once again exercising strong leadership for Canada.
The honourable member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
Our former Conservative government made the decision to retrofit a ship in order to get much-needed equipment to our Navy. Then leaked documents show that Liberals tried to stop this after a company that's friendly to the party was cheesed that they didn't get the contract. After this leak prevented the Liberals from taking this unwise course of action, they attempted to destroy the career of one of Canada's most senior military officers, whose only crime was wanting to get a ship for our Navy. Why?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Madam Speaker, as I've said a number of times in this House and outside this House, it is the RCMP that investigates in such matters. The RCMP investigated, turned evidence over to the Prosecution Service, Madam Speaker. It is the Prosecution Service of Canada, which operates independently of government, that evaluated the evidence, that decided to lay charges, that proceeded with the trial, Madam Speaker, and ultimately decided to stay charges. Madam Speaker, all of this was undertaken independent of the government. There was no political interference, as she herself had said.
The honourable member for Dartmouth, Cole Harbour.
Madam Speaker, this week the Leader of the Opposition miraculously claimed that he now supports our Canada Child Benefit. But actions speak louder than words. The Conservative Party has voted against the Canada Child Benefit at every opportunity. Madam Speaker, they put out a tax guide that didn't acknowledge the existence of the Canada Child Benefit, but included their proposed tax credits for millionaires. Conservative MPs have called the Canada Child Benefit communistic and said CCB investments would be better spent on something else. Could the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development please remind this House and please remind Conservative MPs just how much the Canada Child Benefit...
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development.
Parents and children in Canada have a very simple message for the Conservatives. Keep your hands off the Canada Child Benefit. The Conservative leader has voted against doubling it. The Conservative leader voted against indexing it. The Conservative leader voted against making it tax-free. And if you want to know what the Conservatives' plans for children is, take a look at Doug Ford's War on Children in Ontario. It's what happens when a Conservative government tries to campaign without a platform. They have cut teachers for kids. They have cut libraries for kids. They have cut school lunch programs for kids. They have cut the Child Advocate. They've even cut giving out vaccines for kids. When it comes to the Conservatives, Ford's cuts hurt kids, and they are sheer stupidity.
The honourable member for Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
Madam Speaker, residents in BC continue to flock across the border to fill their tanks with gasoline. They're saving $25 per tank, and that matters. It matters to Canadian families. It matters to small business. It matters to tourism operators and so many more. This minister doesn't seem to understand what a difference that makes in people's lives. Increasing the carbon tax and no deadline in terms of getting Trans Mountain started is a problem. When will they get the pipeline built, and when will they get rid of this carbon tax that is hurting so many?
No plan.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources.
A few things there in that question, Madam Speaker, but as I said before, we are focused on getting the TMX pipeline project done in the right way, something that Conservatives completely ignored for 10 years. They got no pipelines built. We want to make sure, Madam Speaker, they have confidence in the process. The process we got to follow is meaningful consultations, at the same time respecting our environmental obligations. That is what we are focused on. That's what Canadians have to have respect for and have to have confidence in us to get it done in the right way. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
The honourable member for Scarborough Agincourt.
Madam Speaker, removing barriers in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics STEM are fundamental to ensuring equity for researchers across our country. Our government recognizes that we must always strive to tear down these barriers and ensure underrepresented groups can succeed and thrive in the STEM fields. Can the Minister of Science and Sport please tell this House how our government's Made in Canada Athena Swan program will help us achieve this?
The Honourable Minister of Science and Sports.
I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for an excellent question. Will the Harper Conservatives ignore diversity in research? We understand that we cannot afford to leave any talent on the sidelines. Yesterday, I announced new grants and launched Dimensions, a Made in Canada version of the internationally renowned Athena Swan program. This will create more opportunities for women and other underrepresented groups and institutions across Canada. This has been a long-standing problem. The Harper Conservatives did nothing to improve diversity. We're taking action.
The Honourable Member for North Okanagan Shuswap.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Liberal Fisheries Minister continue to fail Pacific salmon and the Canadians that rely on them. Evidence of this failure is another layer of fishing restrictions that will put hundreds of British Columbians out of work. Instead of working against fishermen and coastal communities, the government should work with them to restore Pacific salmon stocks. BC fishers and conservationists know how to put more salmon back in our streams and oceans. So when will the Fisheries Minister start working with the fishermen and not just shutting them out of their fisheries?
There you go.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Fisheries, Oceans and Canadian Coast Guard.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In actual fact, this minister and this government has never stopped working with fishers, has never stopped working with conservationists. The BC Salmon Conservation and Innovation Fund is a prime example of that, where there's been over $100 million federal dollars coupled with provincial dollars to address the challenges facing BC salmon. That work will continue. The consultation will continue, and we are very committed to the restoration of Pacific salmon.
The Honourable Member for Montcalm. Madam Speaker, there won't be a cent prior to the election to compensate producers under supply management. The Parliamentary Budget Officer has confirmed that. But farmers are already feeling the consequences of having been sacrificed in the free trade agreements. For them, compensations aren't an elections issue. They represent an urgent need. We want tangible action, and tangible action includes a check, said producers. So, when will they be receiving their checks? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Agriculture and Agri-Food. Madam Speaker, our government has always been clear. We are the party that put in place supply management, and we will continue to defend it and promote it. We are committed to fully supporting and fairly supporting our supply managed producers with $3.9 billion in compensation for impacts under the CETA and the CPTPP. We are examining the best way of distributing the money. The Minister hopes to finalize this by the end of June. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Honourable Member for Montcalm. Madam Speaker, a check, that's what they want. There's been more than enough reassuring words. The PBO has said that he'd be worried if he were a farmer. There aren't 36,000 ways of reassuring them. Instead of telling supply managed producers, vote Liberal if you want a check, will the government get the checks in the mail before the end of the session? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Agriculture. Madam Speaker, I will reiterate that we are committed to fully supporting producers under supply management with $3.9 million in compensation for CETA and the CTPP. We are aware of the impacts affecting and the future impact of NAFTA. We will continue the discussions to establish the best way of distributing the monies. I'd like to point out that the opposition has all voted against the budget which contains the compensation for producers. The Honourable Member for Montcalm. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives' $100 billion naval strategy was to ensure the survival of shipyards, even if that meant axing Davy and all of its suppliers, namely in the Saguenay. When they came into power, the Liberals wanted to finish the Conservatives' work, finish off Davy, deprive them of contracts, and that's what Vice-Admiral Norman was denouncing. Now that they've dropped their case against the Admiral, will they stop pursuing the Conservative naval strategy and finally ensure justice for Davy?
The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We are happy with the excellent work done by Davy on the Asterix. We are working with all Quebec companies. We have granted $1.5 billion in contracts to Quebec companies. We have entrusted to Davy part of the larger contract worth several billion. And we appreciate the work and the professionalism of that shipyard and its workers.
Nunavut. Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question's for the Minister of Indigenous Services. When it comes to health care, Nunavut don't get the same level of support from their federal government as other Canadians. The national average for federal support is 20%. Nunavut receives less than 10%. As a consequence, the government of Nunavut is forced to pick up the tab for programs the federal government is responsible for. The GN spends in excess of $50 million a year above what they're funded to administer the non-insured health benefits program. Does the minister think this is fair, and will he work with the government of Nunavut to fully fund the administration of this program? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Crown and Indigenous Relations.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Our government is working in support of the government of Nunavut in the provision of health services to its residents. Last week, the Minister of Indigenous Services met with the Minister of Health and Finance for the government of Nunavut to discuss healthcare and a number of other shared priorities. We continue to stay in close communication to ensure that Nunavummiut have access to quality health services they need. Thank you, Madam Speaker.